All right, welcome. Great to see so many folks joining our webinar. Good morning, good evening. My name is Rosie Levine. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S.-China Education Trust, USET. For 25 years, USET has been dedicated to promoting U.S.-China relations through education and exchange. And throughout that period, thousands of Chinese students who annually study in the United States have been a ballast in the bilateral relationship. The students who come here for educational opportunities bring back firsthand knowledge, contribute to the US economy, and bring diverse perspectives to US campuses. The deeper knowledge that they return with American culture, society, and values has really served as a longstanding bridge between our two nations. But today, when we speak to you, that these ties are extremely uncertain as many Chinese students are weighing their future of opportunities in the United States amid growing tensions, visa policy uncertainties, and more. So understanding these student experiences has been a long priority for USET. In 2023, USET published a survey, 3 Decades of Chinese Students in America, 1991 to 2021, which captured the experiences of these students across the decades. And the survey found that 85% of respondents reported finding Americans friendly and welcoming, and a similar percentage said that if they had the choice, they would choose to study in the United States again. So, upon that foundation, which is a very positive one, I think that's a context for our conversation today, which I think we can ask and explore throughout this panel whether we would find the same results if the survey was to be conducted again in this moment in bilateral ties. So, to help unpack this question and to think about both the past and the future of US-China education ties and Chinese students in the United States, we have the privilege of hearing from 3 distinguished experts whose academic and professional paths brought them to the United States and span the generations of Chinese students in the United States. Joining us, we have Minxin Pei, the Tom and Margot Pritzker Professor of Government at Claremont McKenna College, who was among China's first students to pursue advanced studies in the United States in the 1980s, and he earned his doctoral degree from Harvard University at that time. Zongyuan Zoe Liu, who's the Maurice R. Greenberg Senior Fellow for China Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations, who came in a later generation, completing her graduate studies in the 2000s and 2010s from George Washington University and a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. And Zichen Wang, who's the founder of Pekingnology and who just came back a few months ago, completing his mid-career master's in public policy at Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs and represents the newest generation. So each will share how their overseas experience shaped their trajectory, deepened their understanding of both countries, and influenced their perspectives on the relationship. And joining them to moderate this conversation and to bring his perspectives as well is Professor Xie Tao, Distinguished Scholar of American Politics, who earned his own PhD in political science from Northwestern University and is a contributor in China's robust conversation on American studies focused on US-China relations, US Congress, and American public opinion. So tonight we'll look at both kind of the history, the various generations and where we've been, and we'll also look at where we're headed, the future path for educational opportunities for Chinese students in the United States. And lastly, before I turn over the mic, I want to note that tonight's event is the second in a two-part series from USET. So I know many on the call joined us last month to hear from Americans who studied in Americans who studied in China, and now this is the kind of the parallel of series. Both of these webinars were generously funded by the U.S. Embassy in Beijing. And the last session featured Peter Hessler of The New Yorker, Susan Shirk from UC San Diego, Savannah Billman of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, and was moderated by Nason Mabubi from UPenn. So if you joined that conversation, we're excited to have you here for this one as well. If you missed it, we hope you go back and look at the recording or the summary on USET's webpage. And without further ado, then I will turn over the mic to Professor Xie Tao to kick off the conversation. So over to you.
Great, thanks, Rosie. Again, I apologize for getting into the room a little bit late. It's such a privilege and honor to host to moderate the panel this morning and in the evening in California and the United States. When I was asked by Rosie to moderate the panel, I felt like this is cannot be more timely, cannot be more important right now, given the current US-China relations, especially the chilling effect of some of the current administration's policies on Chinese students and scholars. And so let me start off by first, welcoming our three panelists. And the first one, Professor Pei, I read your book when I was a graduate student at Northwestern, even though I had never had the honor of meeting you somewhere. And so I do look forward to seeing you somewhere in person. And then the lady in the middle, Ms. Liu, I've never met before, but I look at your resume, and you also, had your BA in China. And Zichen Wang, of course, we met quite a few times at CCG. And so before I hand over to you, let me just start off by saying a few words about my own personal experience in the US-China educational process. I arrived in the United States on September 9th, 2001, just 2 days before 9/11. So I was very lucky, and so I was still trying to get over the jet lag. And I remember when I went to the Northwestern Library to get my new library card, and I saw people huddle over a black and white television, and there was a building, puking out, smoke and others. I thought this was a big fire. And then when I went back to my, apartment, I was told by my friend in China, and he sent me an email saying United States is under terrorist attack. And so that was my very special backdrop of my learning and studying in the United States. And so I always tell people I am a beneficiary and also a witness to U.S.-China educational exchange. Of course, I got my PhD from Northwestern. I learned what is political science as taught and practiced in the United States compared with the study of politics in China, right? And then I also learned so much about the country that I often say today that up until now is the only one that could have decisive impact on China's domestic and the international trajectory. No other country could play such a pivotal role in China's domestic and the external environment. And so I also, from based on my own learning and training at Northwestern, I also began to grow as a scholar that specialized in American politics and its implications for U.S.-China relationship. And so I feel like I was so lucky to be one of the beneficiaries of this educational exchanges. And so today the theme of our panel, as Rosie just said, is to highlight the importance and the benefits of bilateral educational exchange, and so that we hope in the future there will be more American students coming over to China and Chinese students going over to United States. I just want to cite the most recent statistics before I hand over to our panelists. In 2019 and 2020 academic year, there were about 370,000 Chinese students studying in America. This year, the 2023 and 2024 academic year, the number dropped down to 270,000. So it's a decrease about 100,000 students. There were many, many factors that were behind this dramatic decrease. But one key factor, of course, is the bilateral relationship, right? Okay, with that being said, now let me hand over first to our most senior panelist and the scholar that I have read so much of his works, but even though I never had the opportunity to meet him in person, Professor Pei.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Xie Tao. It's a real honor for me to be with this very distinguished group. Well, first let me say that I missed your anniversary by 1 day. I arrived in the US September the 8th, 1984. Okay. So in 3 weeks, I will celebrate the 41st anniversary of my arrival in the US. I think, my generation is clearly quite different. While you cited the number that is last academic year, the number of Chinese students fell to something like below 300,000 or 270,000, around the number. 1984, the total number of Chinese students in the US was around, I would say, less than 10, probably no more than 50,000, no more. Because I know that year, only about 3,000 Chinese students came. There were very few undergrads. Of course, 1980s China was not wealthy enough to finance its own students. So I came with a scholarship. So let's just give us some perspective. Things may look bad, but they are not as bad as, say, before 79, when the total number was 0. And I hope that as long as the bridge can be wide, can be strong, as long as the bridge is there, we should maintain hope. Like you and like, I think, Zoe and Zichen, I am a huge beneficiary of US-China relations, of American generosity. I spent a total of $100 on my on the 3 degrees, graduate degrees I received in the US, and that's for registration. So that just illustrates the generosity of the American people. So the question, if I'm asked the question again, are American people friendly, welcoming? I would say still yes. You have to separate the American people from its government policy. And I would also submit that the policy toward China, education policy toward China probably is driven by a relatively small number of people who have very strong views, who are deeply committed to a certain perspective on China. Because I being in the educational sector in the US, except for a decade in the think tank for the last 40 plus years. Still, I believe American professors, American students are extremely friendly to foreign students, Chinese students included. And in terms of the experience I've had, professional, social, there's just really nothing that can replace it. And in terms of the change of the times, the 1980s, the biggest obstacle was China, was not the US. It was so long for people like us to get out of China because the government did not know about the US, about the generous scholarships provided by the US. They were afraid of losing talent. I'm glad that these days the Chinese side is not as big a problem as some of the problems the US government can cause.
Right.
So I hope that we should remain optimistic, and we should persuade the people who have power to keep the bridge intact.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, you compared, what we are seeing right now with, the situation in the 1980s. Today, you see, because of the Trump administration's, I would use the word unfriendly, to say the least. It's a visa policy, entry policy. And so there are increasing number of Chinese students who are unwilling and reluctant to go and study in the United States. Instead, they would prefer to think about, say, the UK or Australia and New Zealand. So in that sense, America is kind of facing a shortage of supply of the top, talented students from China compared with back in the 1980s, right? Okay, so now let me move over to our lady, Zoe. And Zoe, could you share with us, your perspective on your experience studying and living in the United States?
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Xie Tao. I want to thank Rosie for the invite, and also thank USCET for the decades of US-China education exchange despite rising challenges. So thank you, Rosie, and thank you and your colleagues at USCET. And it's a great pleasure to be alongside Professor Pei and Zichen. And I'd say I came to the US many years after Professor Pei. I came to the US in August 2011 for my master's degree. And I'd say at that time, US-China relationship was perhaps almost the peak of the honeymoon period. And the reason I remember this was because in 2012 presidential campaign, both presidential candidate on the Republican side and the Democrat side, President Obama, candidate Obama and candidate Mitt Romney, they both ran anti-China campaign advertisement. And that was the first time I understood what it means when people say foreign policy, all foreign policy is about domestic politics in the US context. And then starting from that year, I remember 2013, that was the first time Pew Research, when they started to run US-China relationship, how American people view China. That was the first time since the 80s, that the more Americans viewed China less favorably than viewed China favorably. And of course, since then, the bilateral relationship in terms of Pew survey, how Americans perceive China, has been less and less favorable. And I remember the last time I checked, about 80% of Americans view China as unfavorably, and 40% of Americans view China as threat or enemy. So I think, I feel like I represented the generation of people who grew up in an era when Deng Xiaoping emphasized reform and open up, where peace, 和平与发展, peace and development are the two main themes in the world today. So for my generation, I think I can speak for Zichen as well, but Zichen can correct me. Like I grew up in an era where the tomorrow will be better. That was no doubt. And I also benefited tremendously from China's reform and open up. My parents were the generation of the Cultural Revolution, and I benefited from the rise of China in the context of America welcomed China into the WTO, into the World Trade System since December 2021. So the reason I wanted to come to the United States was because I was genuinely curious about the rise of China and the implications for the rest of the world. At that time, I thought, okay, so China's economy grows fastly, but it seems that there will be a demand for the rest of the world to understand China better. And the reason I had that impression was that, of course, when I was in elementary school, every day on CCTV, I watched that and I see there was a Chinese foreign ministry's spokesperson talk about China's perspective on certain things. And I just thought the guy was cool, wearing suit with the flag in the background. I just thought the guy was cool. And then I remember the first time I went to Beijing when I was before I start elementary school. I took the big bus, like my parents took me on the bus, and the bus went like passed through Waijiabu Foreign Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I thought, wow, this is where the guy was supposed to be. So it's sort of like I was just genuinely curious about like the rise of China, the implication for the world, especially from the economic perspective, because that's something materially I felt materially change. I can feel it, I experienced it, and of course my parents' generation felt it. Then coming to the US, the more I learned about economic issues, the more I become sympathetic in a lot of ways with the perspective of the global backlash, especially American people's backlash against globalization, and the idea that other countries are stealing American jobs. I became sympathetic in the sense that I realized not everybody in America have been to China, but a lot of people in America, they lived through the period, they had the exact opposite experience as my generation had, which was my generation, I've seen people becoming rich, but for some of the American people, I guess, hillbilly eulogy would be a great example. They experienced the rise of the decline of American manufacturing industry, and it is simply very easy, very catchy to blame a boogeyman. And unfortunately, when China didn't have the sophisticated tools to explain itself, but rather choose warrior diplomacy strategy, you ended up having China fall into the trap and lead to this deterioration of at least the narrative and perspectives. I guess I will conclude just by saying that I'm definitely a beneficiary, and I think my generation represented perhaps the golden era of U.S.-China education engagement. And by the way, when I came to the United States, the dollar renminbi exchange rate was $1 equal to 2.2, 6.2 or 6.15. So, like from educational point of view, from a value perspective, that was a great deal. And now, despite despite renminbi depreciated, I can still see a lot of Chinese students want to study in the United States, but it does not help when the US government implement anti-China narrative. It doesn't help when Chinese media run selectively run news showing that America has a gunshot, has bombs here and there. So I feel like I'll just conclude by saying that I hope in the future, my friends in China, their children, their grandchildren can still enjoy the benefit and the advantage that I had, the privilege that I had to come and study in the United States. And I hope that my friends in the United States, and their children and their grandchildren can enjoy the benefit of going to China, enjoy the culture, understand China better.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Thanks, Zoe. You mentioned a lot of things that resonated with me. For example, about the dollar exchange rate, and this reminded me before I departed, for Detroit. At that time, there was no direct flight from Beijing to Chicago. I had to fly first to Detroit. I remember I had some foreign exchange at the ICBC Bank outside at the west entrance of Peking University. At that time, $1 was worth 9.5 RMB, and it was on the black market. And so I had Professor Pei mentioned like he spent 100 US dollars. I brought a total of 1,500 US dollars with me on my flight to Detroit, and so that was 1,500 US dollars. And today, of course, like you said, there is a depreciation of the RMB, but still it's $1 worth one point. I think now it's $1 versus 7.3 something. Yeah.
Okay, well, let me just jump in about some exchange rate. 1984, the Chinese exchange was ridiculously overvalued. At the time, it was 2 yuan for a dollar, but you couldn't take any money out of China. So I was allowed $200 in foreign exchange to leave, and my college, Shanghai, lent me the money for the air ticket. I brought $100 in my pocket. I left $100 to my wife. So in those days, just to show that how far China has come. Yeah, I think it's a good thing for China.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
But also at the same time, is that, as I said earlier, that it's without American scholarship, people like me just could not have studied in the US.
No. Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption.
No. Yeah. Okay, now let's shift over to our youngest panelist, Mr. Wang, and because Zoe just mentioned about how China fell short of expressing its own positions on the international stage, and I think Zichen is really working very hard at trying to conveying a Chinese government and Chinese perspectives to the international media. Am I correct, Zichen? I have your WeChat and I see you are posting a lot of stuff. So why don't you share with us your experience?
Thank you, Professor Xie Tao. I think I want to start by thanking Rosie and the USCET for the opportunity of appearing here. Although we've never met, I'm sure we will somewhere in the United States or in China. And I want to thank Professor Xie Tao for moderating the session, and I'm truly grateful for the opportunity of appearing with the esteemed Professor Minxin Pei and also my friend Zoe. So I guess I may be the youngest, and it's a fact that I look a little bit childish, which according to a senior Indian journalist a few days ago at the Indian Independence celebration immigration in Beijing, but actually, I guess I spent the least time in the United States compared with three of you. I actually just spent 1 year at the mid-career Master in Public Policy program in the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, formerly known as Woodrow Wilson School. And it was a mid-year, it was a mid-career program, so it only admitted professionals with at least 7 years of working experience. So most of our classmates were like 30 something or 40 something. So I guess in that sense, I'm not a typical traditional Chinese student in the United States because I think most of them came to the United States either I mean in the older days after a bachelor's degree in the Chinese mainland immediately or mostly and or maybe in the more recent years they came to the United States at a much younger age for high school or maybe for a bachelor's degree directly. So I graduated from a Chinese mainland college in 2011 and I went to the US in July 2024, so last year. So there were 13 years in between my bachelor's degree and my pursuit of a master's degree in Princeton. And just like Professor Pei and Professor Xie mentioned, I was also a beneficiary of I guess, the generosity of the American people because I had a full scholarship from Princeton and it paid for everything. And so the School of Public and National Affairs was indeed very generous. And if any of the audience are watching is considering a policy school, application, think about SPEAR because it's two master's degrees are totally free of charge for anyone who had the opportunity to join them. So it was indeed a fantastic program, and I think although it was not a government sponsorship, it was a scholarship by the university, by the school. I think that represents still to this very day, I think compared with any other developed Western country in the world, that the U.S. offers perhaps the most generous financial sponsorship for students from from outside its borders. And also, I think people when I came back to China in June, I guess, so maybe 2 months ago, and I've been asked a lot of times, what was my experience in the United States? Did I encounter, any unpleasant experience? Because, my personal background was also, I guess, a little bit different in that I had, almost 13 years of full-time working experience before joining the Princeton. So I'm not I was not freshly out of college. And also in the 13 years, I had 11 years of working at Xinhua News Agency, China's state-run news agency, after which I joined the Center for China and Globalization, a non-governmental think tank in Beijing. So I guess I was not seen as some sort of Chinese master's student freshly out of Chinese college. So in that sense, I was also a little bit different. But overall, my experience in the United States was very friendly. I did not encounter any, instance of racism or what I believe was, some sort of hate or unpleasant experiences because I was Chinese. So I find the American people, my professor, my classmates, the people I, had the opportunity to meet and talk with, they were very friendly. And in that sense, I would echo what Professor Page just mentioned. And of course, because I used to work at, China's state news agency, and then I was working at a think tank in Beijing. So professionally speaking, and I was at a policy school. So my classmates and the students in our other programs, as well as the faculty members, many of them had a very senior, government experience. So, and it was a policy school dedicated to study, public policy, international affairs. So I guess we approach, issues in classrooms, in seminars, with our professional background, with that in mind. And but I think and also in Princeton, although Spear is a much smaller school than a comparable school, for example, the Harvard Kennedy School, but I also saw many students in Princeton that are from Chinese, that are from science and technology, doing studies in chemistry, in biology. I was actually stunned by the presence of so many Chinese students in Princeton, and that they were able to come and they were able to conduct research, and they were collaborating with their U.S. professors and international students. And I think the university and including the school I was in was also very open-minded about welcoming Chinese students. And I think one of the things that people within the higher education sector realizes, and perhaps that is missing from the minds of some of the U.S. politicians' brains, is that it's a like the at in higher education, and especially when it comes to STEM studies, it's a symbiotic process. It's not a extractive process. So, for example, I think what matters most, and when people talk about brain drain or talent competition, the crown of the jewel is a PhD students, is a advanced studies, but it's not that it's the Chinese students, the Indian students, the Mexican student. They came to the United States. They sat in the classroom, and they took something from their American professors and peers, especially in science and technology. It's simply not like that. They Yes, they sat in the lectures, and they learned so much from their American professors and fellow students, but they contribute. They work in labs, 40 hours a week, and they innovate. They come up with ideas, and they implement them. Their results, many of which was funded by maybe not anymore today, by these science foundations, by the U.S. government. Their research are published in leading U.S. journals and are widely discussed in the industry, and most of which the best researchers are still within the United States. It's truly, the word has become a cliche by this time. It's a win-win process. It's not that the foreign students just came and took stuff away. And unfortunately, I think that remains the perception of many people when they talk about the issue. And also, when it comes to PhD students, I think the latest number that is available still shows, for example, when it comes to the Chinese students, the overwhelming majority of the Chinese originated PhD graduates in the United States, especially in natural science and in technology, they actually choose to remain in the United States. They want to pursue their American dream. They want to start their own businesses. They want to make big money, and they want to further their scientific research. As the United States has this discussion, cheerleaded by some leading politicians against students from China and perhaps also from other places for taking the posts that should have belonged to Americans, according to them, quote unquote. There is actually also discussion in China, I think, which has been going on for quite a few years, is that why does so many very bright minds out of China's leading universities go to the United States and don't come back? And I think the education collaboration or cooperation, however you name it, they face backlash here and there. And what I find quite surprising and actually quite uncomfortable is that I see a rising lack of confidence in the part of the U.S. I think, for example, when Harvard University has been vehemently attacked for all kinds of reasons, including its China ties. And in the Wall Street Journal, which typically has very best, I think among the best China coverage among US newspapers, there was a report on the Harvard Kennedy School and dubbed it as, overseas party school of China. And
Okay.
I just
Okay.
find it a little bit unimaginable that for the United States to have its best social science faculty to sharing the wisdom with Chinese government professionals and policy professionals. I mean, the U.S. should be proud of that rather than fearful of that fact. And
Yeah. Look,
yeah,
sorry,
maybe I'm
because
going on
I
for too long.
I'll cut you short here. You mentioned about this. I would characterize as this increasing sense of insecurity, a sense of threat perception. By U.S. government officials, particularly starting from 2016, right? And you mentioned the Chinese students. Some of them were called the agents of the Chinese government, and they were viewed with suspicion and resentment, etc. Okay, and so I want to come back again to this topic of U.S.-China educational exchange because I think two of you, Zoe and Professor Pei, mentioned the word generosity. Of course, generosity has to come from somewhere. That means that you have to have the hard power of financial resources to fund the students, right? Today, in light of the Trump administration's war, I would use the word war on American colleges, and so you can see there's on many campuses there's a significant decrease in finance, in funding, and so that could mean fewer scholarships for international students. And so, Professor Pei, because you are on college campus, and so do you see any appreciable, very clear trends of students coming over to Claremont or other institutions that you are familiar with?
Yeah. Okay. Well, my college is quite special. Because it's small, it's undergraduate only, and it's private. It's quite wealthy. Still, I think based on my observation, I don't have the exact numbers. We do see a decreasing trend, and this is, well, I think your opening remarks mentioned the sort of the almost a 40%, well, 30%, 25% reduction over the last 5 years for all kinds of reasons. And I think the tense relationship between the two countries is a very important factor. The reason this is what I think funding probably at the undergraduate level is not an issue because Chinese undergrads actually pay their own way. American schools like them. One of the biggest victims would not be the Chinese undergrads, would be American colleges, because the U.S. higher education has a problem of overcapacity. They have third, fourth tier private schools and some state schools. Without foreign students, roughly there are about 1 million foreign students in the US. Without foreign students, a lot of schools simply don't have enough demand. So they will have to downsize or even go out of business. So that is the worry. Another, I think in terms of funding, the biggest hit would be for those graduate programs, because STEM grad students are funded in a roundabout way by grants from NSF, NIH. Their professors simply need grad students to work in the labs. So I think this will have a huge impact, and we may see almost a generational negative impact. Even social sciences can be affected. I've read that UPenn, which was hit by government funding, reduction in government funding, they were going to admit fewer sociology students, fewer grad students in social science programs. So as far as Chinese grad students are concerned, I think that would be a problem, but not as big a problem as when I was trying to come to the US. In the 80s, in the 90s, it was simply impossible to come here. Today, it's still I think possible, even if you have to come on your own time.
Yeah, Zoe, I understand you work at CFA, Council on Foreign Affairs. And my experience, I've been on delegations to Washington, D.C. a few times before. And so usually CFA would be one of our stops. And so I'm just wondering, given the current, environment, do you see more of Chinese delegations coming over to Washington? Like I would call this like think tank tour, or you see there's at CFA or Brookings or Carnegie, like they are increasingly unwilling to host these Chinese delegations. I'm just curious, Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Xie Tao, for participating in some of these delegations to come
Right.
to Washington, D.C. Think tank circle. For me, I'm based in New York, and yeah, you're right.
Oh, okay.
Council on my employer, Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, has a office in D.C., and we also have a headquarters in. Our headquarters is in New York, and in fact, I think Professor Pei, Professor Pei has been to our headquarters, right? And I think it's Zichen. I have also invited Zichen, and our colleagues have invited Zichen as well. So I'd say overall. The first thing I want to clarify is that the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, is a non-partisan membership organization. It has over 100 years of history, and it published its flagship magazine is Foreign Affairs. I think a lot of people read it, but that doesn't mean people like me, when we pitch to FA, they would take it. It is not, rejection is as often as everybody else. That being said, Foreign Affairs as well as the CFR, we try to build, to quote Professor Minxin Pei, earlier he mentioned the bridge. Regardless, the bridge is narrower or wider, but there is bridge. And what we try to do is to be this bridge, to be a reliable bridge, non-partisan bridge, in good times and bad times. And I'm happy to report that despite during COVID time, we really didn't have in-person meetings, but since COVID, since December 2022 and early 2000 and January 2003, I personally have hosted several visiting Chinese delegations, and some Chinese officials. I wouldn't name names, but these are all some of their speech at CFR are on public record, and people can go to our website to take a look at it. And we have RA program, like we have a internship program, which is very prestigious. I think some of the statistics show that the admission rate is as low as something like 1% something. That basically means it's even more difficult to get a CFR internship than go to Harvard. But that said, we did have Chinese student successfully won internship at CFR. Like they legally enroll in American universities, and the CFR internship is paid, is endowed. So I'd say broadly through my personal experience, I'd echo what you said, Professor Pei and Zichen said. There is a tremendous generosity from American people and American companies. The need, the desire to understand China, I'd say, is even higher today than perhaps when relationship was good, because people recognize that given some of the statistical challenges reading Chinese numbers, and perhaps reading U.S. numbers, given that the government fired BLS head. So like given the travel challenges, given the lack of confidence for Americans to go to China, the need, or for that matter, simply just the lack of flight. I mean, flying from the United States to China is still very expensive. It's like not everybody can easily afford a $1,000 ticket or something like that, right? So in this current environment, I'd say desire to understand China is even higher. And especially for American companies, despite a lot of these conversations about, or the concerns about decoupling or de-risking, companies at least realize that it's impossible to separate their supply chain, remove their supply chain out of China. I mean, just to think about it, I think every one of us have moved. Some of us even moved from China to US or moved from US to China. If moving house is so difficult, just imagine how difficult it is going to be moving out your supply chain from China, right? So from that perspective, I'd say, yes, through my work, I do see continued interest in understanding China, and the challenge here is how to provide apolitical, nonpartisan, fact-based explanation about why China did what it did, or why the US conducted the policy it did. And the important part here is also to recognize that we cannot simply treat China as a holistic entity. China is not. There is rural-urban division. There is a central-local division. There is the Chinese government, the party, versus the Chinese people. And there are rich Chinese people, there are poor Chinese people. And I'd say my generation represent the generation of the rise of middle class. My parents saved up. They are not ultra rich. They saved up to send their kids to study overseas. And I hope that this trend can continue. And I do see interests on both sides to continue. And it really warms me up every time when I get an email from Chinese professor or Chinese think tank or my American student just to email me, hey, Zoe, I wanted to go to China, or hey, Zoe, I'm coming to the United States. Can we visit CFR? Can we visit you? Or, it's emails like this, it's interest in exchange like this warm me up. I guess is why I continue to be motivated and interested in doing what I do.
Oh, great. Thanks, yeah, Zoe. Yeah. Now to turn. I have a question for you. I've never got a chance to visit Princeton, even though during the past January I took my family to the United States. We took the train from Boston down to New York. I thought about stopping by, but eventually we decided against it. Could you because you said it's a mid-career program. It's for people who have at least 7 years of work experience. So what do you benefited the most from your study at Princeton?
Well, thank you for the question. So, most of my career was a journalist at China's state-run news agency, and then 2 years at a non-governmental think tank. And my bachelor's degree was not in social sciences or policy studies. So I guess what I got most from the 1 year program in Princeton was I was able to get a more systematic training on how to approach policy analysis, how to study some of the issues from a more scholarly fashion rather than just trying to document and trying to just gather the facts, but how to analyze it, how to develop some methods and use the more scientific methods to analyze these issues. And but of course it was a mid-career program for just 1 year. So and Princeton also made a lot of efforts to invite outside speakers. So we always had, and I guess it's true across U.S. campuses, to always have guest speakers from from the legislature, from the government, from the private sector, and not just Americans but also foreigners and foreign leaders and foreign politicians. And so there was a very robust exchange of ideas and oftentimes a lot of different opinions. There was speakers from Israel. There was speakers from other countries in the region. So you could imagine. And Personally, I also took advantage of my time there to to visit. I had the enormous opportunity of going to Council on Foreign Relations and did a lunch break sharing session at the invitation of Zoe's colleague, and I had the opportunity of speaking at several think tanks and going to Bloomberg's Odd Lots podcast. And so, I mean, for me personally, it was like Princeton was like my base, and I was able to stroll around. And I think that's also the experience for many Chinese students in the United States. Yes, they spent most of their time, the majority of their time within their campuses, but they made American friends. They had life-changing experiences. And if they came back to China, they became the unofficial ambassadors of American generosity, of American culture, of American food and lifestyle, and became bridges between these two countries. And these human-to-human ties, I guess, are increasingly important when the travel between the two sides are actually quite, the numbers are down and the tensions are high, and the two countries are very prone to strategic misunderstanding of one another, and sometimes what seems to be not very complicated matters. So these human links, if you could give a phone call to your classmate and maybe ask what does this mean, and that could, I guess, that could help actually a lot. And yeah, so coming back to your question, I did learn a lot in my time for the last year in Princeton.
Okay, great. Zoe mentioned about just now, in these extraordinary times of U.S.-China relationship, there's a, extraordinary demand for high quality, China-related research and knowledge, right? And so you said CFR is positioned as one of the providers of such important information. So my question is that, my sense, somebody told me like United States, today there are fewer and fewer China scholars. I mean, not unlike people like Professor Pei, I would say like native-born American scholars of China, like David Lampton's, David Qianbao and others, right? And so people say there are fewer and fewer China hands, and the ones that you do have in Washington D.C. or New York are of the younger generation. They rarely spend extended period of time in China, and so they are kind of lose touch with the reality in China. And so they are saying like basically the quality of China research is not as good as it used to be. Whereas the demand, like Zoe said, there is such a high demand for good quality research on China. This is one part of the question. I think this is mostly for Professor Pei. But the other side is like, I am somebody who spent 6 years trying to understand American politics. So I always position myself as an Americanist. However, you see, look at U.S.-China educational exchange. Many Americans come to China as either China scholars or scholars of China-U.S. relations. But the very few Americanists come over to China, like people who study Congress, people who study race, immigration, ethnicity, American history, right? Or historians may be different. So this is not a question, but it's a comment. Like, so given my own capacity, now I'm, administrator at a mid-sized school of international relations. So I'm promoting the study of U.S. domestic politics. And so there's so many more Americans who specialize in the study of China's domestic politics. And then you look at the number of Chinese who specialize in the study of American domestic politics. It's so asymmetrical. It's so lopsided, right? So I'm just throwing on this question to all three of you. What is the quality of China research right now? Is it really worrisome? Like, if you want to have a sound U.S. policy towards China, doesn't the government need people like who are, fair, balanced, scientifically, down research to guide their policy? Yeah.
Yeah, because I've been sort of in this field, I can sort of share some of my observations. It's a very important question. It's hard to measure the quality because
Mhm.
this is a very subjective thing. But these are the things I worry about. One thing is not just China studies; it's the overall social science. We're talking about political science in general. Over the last 30 years, there's a major shift. I mean, you study American politics and Northwestern, many leading programs emphasize the so-called formal modeling, quantitative approach. So that narrows the kind of questions you can ask. So when you look at PhD thesis, the topics are very, very different from those that people like me would be writing on, say, 30 plus years ago. They tend to be quite technical, and they do not, basically, if you cannot get a data set, you cannot finish your dissertation. So that's the limit. So in other words, a lot of the serious, interesting topics in China cannot be quantified. So that's one. The other problem, I have to say, has to do with China. China has become much less open. It's very difficult to do research in China. Archives are being shut down. A lot of databases are not made available. Scholars like me are afraid to go to China. So you have that kind of problem. And then the third problem is this overall decline of interest in China, which means that smart grad students, when they look at this sort of their future, say, shall I invest years of my time studying a very difficult language when it's very hard to find jobs? And if you go to China, you cannot get security clearance if you want to work for the US government later on. So all of these things, I would say, that would lead to a decline in the capabilities of American, of China-focused intellectual capital. Right now, my sense is the US is still taking advantage of 40 years of engagement, which produced really several generations of high, very talented scholars on China. But I worry about 10, 20 years from now, they will have a shortage of talent.
What is your take on this, Zoe?
I agree with everything Professor Pei said. I guess I'll put two additional footnote there. One on education in terms of higher ed methodology in the political science field, and then the other point was to your point, will be to your point about what does politicians or policymakers want, and who advise them, and who they want to advise them. So the first part with regard to methodology, I'd say personally, I experienced this trend of quantification of quantitative research focus in political science field in general, and in my specialization in terms of international political economy, building models, trying to figure out proxies to measure things, trying to use design sophisticated regression models with what has been, when I was in school, it was the approach, and now the trend is only more intense, especially considering the use of AI. And this has two implications. The first one is political scientists, they no longer feel the need, the drive to learn the language, to live in China, to understand the culture, to sort of read between the tea leaves. We think in order to publish at top academic journals, all they need to do is to spend 3 weeks in a rural village or in a city, gather data, build models, and there you go. And exactly as Professor Pei mentioned, China is so sophisticated, it's so complex. There is no one single model can explain China, let alone correctly predict or explain China. So I think that's just the sad part of publish or perish mantra in academia. And I think a lot of people realize that, and I think I'll give Professor Pei a lot of credit to that, because he has been emphasizing the importance of mixed method, especially understanding. He has been pushing back about overemphasizing on models, and models needs to be backed by implications and meanings. So I'll give Professor Pei a lot of credit to that. And then in terms of policy advisors, this concerns me. Part of the reason this concerns me for quite a variety of issues. The reasons. The first part is politicians, they tend to not necessarily want to. It was told to me by a former national security advisor, like presidents get elected not to be told that they cannot do things, and they came with their own set of experience and their own preferences, and then politicians get elected, and they owe people who elected them. So I think a lot of this, sometimes even it's not necessarily what is right or wrong that matters the most. Is really about what gets reelected. It's as simple as that. I think in a democracy, especially in a democracy when media tends to go with like a sensational titles. Even the article itself has nothing to do with China being bad, China stealing our job, but the title could be that way, right? So I think it's in a lot of ways, when politics get involved, it's not really about what is right or what is wrong. The desire to process or to read through 400 pages of a book about Chinese politics, the desire is not there. Presidential memos is like 1 page. How can you condense, a 400-page insightful paper book in 1 page? There's a limit to that. And of course, presidents are and politicians, they are busy. They have other priorities. So I just feel like the sad truth is that now U.S.-China relationship are at this moment, and it probably is not a bad idea for the two countries to take a step back and reassess.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's right. Because I had some experience like what you just described. So now let me shift over to Zichen. Any take on what I just said about this quality of research on China, or maybe perhaps more about research on America in China. Because you are based in CCG, right? There's a lot of research on American politics and U.S.-China relations too.
Oh, thank you, Professor Xie Tao. I think it's a two-way street, and actually I spend more time, or I guess I'm seen largely in the so-called China washing community, where from the Chinese mainland perspective, there are just constant complaints about, Americans don't understand China, misunderstand China, and I guess two of the most usual complaints is they don't visit China, and secondly is they don't speak to the Chinese language. And I guess if you examine similar discussions, these two topics always come up from time to time. I think, of course, there is a certain truth to that, and I guess some American scholars don't speak the Chinese language, and I personally, I'm sad to see there are fewer and fewer visits from the China scholars in the United States coming to China for various reasons. They have to be frank, they have their fears, and I think if given the chance, if given the comfort, the ease of mind, I think and the budget, most of them would, of course, would be willing to come to China to do the field studies, and with the hospitality of the Chinese researchers, of the Chinese people, and hopefully the convenience, by relevant Chinese facilities. And it's the same. It's the other way around, I guess. Like Americans would also want to see more American watchers in China come to the United States and visit the Council on Foreign Relations, universities in California, and not just the traditional so-called mainstream think tanks, but also perhaps, as I personally see it, maybe more importantly in this era, to go to some of the conservative think tanks, Heritage Foundation and others in DC and across the country. I guess for China to develop its American policy and for the United States to develop a more sound China policy, these kind of exchanges are very important. And I'm sure almost all the three of you are playing some sort of roles in facilitating this sort of exchanges. And I think Zoe came to China last year as part of the University of Pennsylvania's PEN project on the future on U.S.-China relations, which is headed by Nathan Mabubi, whose name I heard he was the moderator in the first part of the discussion. That's a fantastic program coming to China, to think tanks, and also to China's government authorities to establish ties. I think these are very, very important. And because again, the backdrop is there is a decreasing interest in this sort of interest and in this sort of visits, and I think many people understand when this sort of visits take place, people carry burner phones and burner laptops. I'm sorry, that's just a sad reality we are in today, and
Yeah.
I think if yeah.
Yeah, I just want to, chime in with, a few examples I had, when I talked to a few American counterparts. I remember when I was visiting DC and New York City, and they told me that they are now reluctant to reach out to their Chinese colleagues, either for a joint conference or coming over to China for field trips, because the US government is also tightening its own scrutiny over American scholarship in China or any kind of connections with Chinese universities. And I'm sure Professor Pei and Zoe know what I'm talking about. So this over securitization is happening in the United States, to an extent that I was never expecting. And so, U.S. government says it's de-risking, but in the end, when you de-risk, the inevitable outcome of de-risk would be decoupling, because many of China scholars in the United States are so, I would not say frightened, but they are so prohibited from coming over to China. They worry about security clearance. They have to report to their Office of Research, like at Duke and Indiana University and others. Right? The same, of course, you could find here in China. But I would say, based on my own experiences with my counterparts in the United States, this securitization is becoming even more a chilling factor among American academic community than the situation in China. Okay, but before we move on, we have about less than 20 minutes to go. I do get some questions. Here is one. I think it's quite interesting. Let me just read this out very quickly. Say, the question related to cultural integration says that concerns about cultural integration also arise with regarding Chinese students. Some believe that Chinese students may struggle to assimilate into American culture, leading to social isolation or the formation of an insular community. And this can create a divide between international students and domestic American students. I know this is a question that was in the making for many, many years. When I was a student, I'm pretty sure when Professor Pei came over here in 1980s, there was also this question in the minds of many Americans, can the Chinese students assimilate to American culture, or are they going to live in their own, insular community, speaking Chinese, eating Chinese food, no socializing or mingling with their American students and professors? Okay. Professor Pei?
Okay. My circumstances are quite special. My observation of Chinese students now, I think probably this is a bigger problem for undergrads than for graduate students, because I don't deal with a lot of undergrads, so I cannot give you fresh examples. I think my personal experience is that in the 1980s, there were so few Chinese students that it's pretty hard to form your own community. So most of us socialize with non-Chinese students. So I got to know my American students, my American colleagues quite well. In terms of cultural integration, the problem is not Chinese versus American after I finish. It's really this ivory tower problem, what I call the sort of professional barriers. You might even call it class barriers. That is, if you are a highly educated PhD working in a think tank or in a town like Princeton, Cambridge, or Claremont, you really don't have a chance to get to know American working class people. All my friends, practically all of them are non-Chinese. They are other professors, they are other highly educated people. So my regret, just as somebody who has lived here for 41 years, is that I really don't have American friends who are not as highly educated as sort of my other colleagues. I don't get to know them. And, Americans live in very segregated communities. Let's just be very honest about this. So you don't know. I don't even know what my neighbors do. So how can I be sort of culturally? But at the same time, I think I'm quite culturally integrated in terms of understanding American pop culture, watching TV, reading newspapers. But on a person-to-person level, that's going to be my sort of lifelong regret.
Okay, interesting. Zoe?
I guess to answer the question about, Chinese American students wishing to study in China, I just wanted to use an anecdote that both Rosie and I can relate to. Rosie and I, we were in the same we were in the same cohort of this PEN. It's a U.S. PEN. It's run by Nathan Mahombi, which Zichen mentioned earlier. So Nathan ran this program, I think, for a couple of years now. And every year, what Nathan does is that he bring American scholars and bring them to China for extended period of time. We went last year, and I believe Nathan lead a new generation of scholars to China again. I think sometime this summer, and he's not just leading like adults like us. He also expanded the program to include college students. And I personally had the experience, had the privilege to sit in Nathan's class, for example. And I think, and in his class, I observed a very talented and motivated students. There are Chinese American, there are American American, there are perhaps Korean American, like also a variety of Americans. It's a diverse a group of students. But in this cohort, they read, they debate, they study, and Nathan also bring them. I believe for people who don't know Nathan, reach out to him, and he has this model. And I think this is a really good model to sort of engage students when they are even in college, cultivate scholarship, and encourage them to and have a safe channel to go to visit China. And in addition to program like this, there are also Schwarzman program, for example. People can apply, and there are also, I think in Peking University, there is a Yanqing Scholar Program. And in my alma mater, Johns Hopkins University has this Nanjing Center, and students can go to study there. So I'd say if there are students, whether you are a Chinese American, whether you are, any form of Americans, right? If as long as you are interested in studying China, there are opportunities.
Zichen,
yeah, I think as Zoe said, there are still very good bonds that are still existing today, and some of which are well financed. And Schwarzman, I think, seems to be doing really well at Tsinghua University. And also, I think the Chinese President Xi Jinping, when he visited the United States in 2023, he also made the initiative of having 50,000 Americans young people are visiting China in 5 years. And well, according to China's foreign ministry, they had like 16,000 visits in the first year, and I hope that there are just more and more such visits, and I remain quite hopeful because people, when we talk about the recent crackdown on Chinese students into the United States and maybe the broader U.S. higher education. People use the word Trump administration, but so far, based on what I read in the newspapers and saw on TV, I don't sense President Donald Trump himself had a thing against Chinese students. I mean, for example, the scrutiny of Chinese student visas came from the State Department, followed by a tweet by Secretary of State himself. But then, I mean, almost immediately after that, President Trump was asked a few times on TV, and he was basically saying there was like he didn't have any particular problem with Chinese students, and they if my memory serves me right, and he was basically saying they should just undergo the same procedures as other international students, and President Trump is seen as well, is seen in many ways, and his personal China policy has also made a lot of headlines recently, and as everyone is expecting a China-U.S. Presidential summit sometime soon. I hope like the two countries' senior leadership could really put higher education, the exchange of students into their agenda, because I think from the Chinese perspective, it was very apparent that the Chinese leadership and put a lot of emphasis on this, and because when the scrutiny of Chinese students was announced by the Secretary of State, even in the economic and financial dialogue with the Chinese head and in the Chinese Foreign Ministry's statement, it was very clear that China wants to, maintain this channel of student exchanges, of welcoming American students to come to China and sending Chinese students, enabling, Chinese parents to have their children to go to the United States. And that is perhaps the correct way of framing this. And yeah.
Okay.
And thank you
I'm
for the
reminded
opportunity.
by Rosie that we are running out of time. So before we end, let me come back to each of you very quickly, just one sentence. One sentence. What do you want to say to our audience this evening and this morning? Just one sentence. Let me start with Zichen. Let's reverse the order. Zichen, just one sentence.
I think I want to use the one sentence from I shared a little bit earlier. It's a symbiotic process. It's truly win-win. Although it's become a sort of a cliche in the China-U.S. relations, and both sides get something out of it. And we should be more confident. Actually, I think the fear, the resistance, the increasing scrutiny reflect a lack of confidence rather than
Okay, Zoe.
Since this is really about people to people, right? Education. I guess I'll conclude by quoting a sentence from President Reagan. I guess quote / paraphrase. I remember he once said that the American people and the Chinese people are very similar. And when it comes to education and education exchange, I believe he's right.
Yeah,
Professor Pei.
there's very little we can do about what governments do, but there's a lot we can do as human beings, as individuals. So to use the metaphor you referred to at the beginning, I think we do whatever we can to keep the bridge standing.
Okay, so as moderator, I would take the liberty of using this to say, like, experience America yourself. Discover America yourself. There's so much disinformation and misinformation in the social media of both countries, and those can be extremely misleading. And so my advice to all of you is that find out America with your own eyes, and so experience America yourself. And so before I conclude, let me again thank USCET for organizing this panel. I want to thank Rosie for inviting us and for giving me the opportunity to get know some of these very prominent scholars and analysts. And so back to you, Rosie.
Great. Well, thank you. And on behalf of USCET and our audience, an enormous thanks to our panelists, Zichen Wang, Xie Tao, Minxin Pei, and Zoe Liu. You've been really helpful in not only sharing your own personal journeys, but I think a really frank assessment of the current state of US-China ties and some advice for future generations of scholars. So we are so grateful that you all were able to join us, and we hope everyone online enjoyed this program as much as we did. We'll be posting the video online after the program, and for those of you who are joining us and you want to stay involved with USCET's future programs, please follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to stay in touch, and we hope to see you on future programs coming up soon. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good evening or have a good rest of your day.